The first thing Officer Cole Mercer said to Amara Bennett was, "You lost, ma'am." The second thing he did was put his hand on his gun. And the third thing, well, that was the moment he made the kind of mistake that ruins a man slowly, publicly, and for good. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon in Bellwood, Ohio, one of those late September days when the air still had a little summer left in it. The trees were starting to turn gold around the edges, and everybody seemed to be moving just a little slower than usual. Amara had been sitting outside a small bakery on Linden Street, right across from the old public library where she used to study after school when she was a kid. She had on dark jeans, white sneakers, a faded green jacket, and a pair of sunglasses pushed up on top of her head. Nothing about her said Billionaire. Nothing about her said founder of Bennett Urban Holdings, the woman whose name sat on the side of half the renovated buildings downtown. Nothing about her said she had spent the last 20 years building one of the most successful real estate development companies in the Midwest. And that was exactly how she liked it. Amara had never been much for being recognized. She had money now, sure, more than she ever imagined she would when she was 12 years old and sharing a bedroom with her little sister in a two-bedroom apartment with a broken heater. But money had not made her forget what it felt like to be looked at and instantly judged. Some people saw an expensive suit and assumed you mattered. Some people saw worn sneakers and decided you did not. Amara had spent her whole life watching people make up stories about her before she ever opened her mouth. That afternoon, she had just finished a meeting with the owner of a family grocery store a few blocks away. He was thinking about selling, and Amara wanted to see the neighborhood for herself before making any promises. Not through tinted car windows, not from a conference room 30 floors up, but standing where people actually stood, hearing the buses hiss at the curb, smelling the coffee, watching mothers pull strollers over cracked sidewalks. She had bought a cinnamon roll from the bakery, sat down on the low brick wall outside, and for maybe 10 minutes, she let herself breathe. That was when Officer Mercer noticed her. He had been parked across the street in his cruiser, engine running, window halfway down. Amara saw him looking at her before he came over. Not the casual glance of somebody checking a street corner. Not the kind of look a person gives another person because they recognize them. This was different. This was the look of someone who had already decided there was a problem and was just shopping around for a reason to call it one. Mercer was in his late 40s. Broad through the shoulders, square jaw, close-cropped gray hair, the kind of face that looked like it had practiced being annoying for years. He was known around Bellwood, though not in a good way. People said he had a short fuse. People said he liked stopping teenagers for no reason. People said he had a habit of treating certain parts of town like they belonged to him and certain people like they did not belong there at all. But people said a lot of things in Bellwood, and most of them said it quietly. Because when the man you are talking about wears a badge, drives a cruiser, and knows which streets you live on, quiet can feel safer than honest. Mercer crossed Linden Street without hurrying. He looked at Amara, then at the bakery window behind her, then at the bakery window behind her, then at the empty paper bag in her lap. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. Amara looked up at him and smiled politely. "No, officer, I am sitting down." He stared at her for a beat, like he was trying to decide whether that answer annoyed him or amused him. "This area is private commercial property." Amara glanced at the brick wall beneath her. "It is a public sidewalk." "That is not what I said." "No," she replied, still calm. "It is not." Now most people would probably tell you that was not a big moment. Two strangers exchanging sharp words outside a bakery, nothing more. But sometimes you can feel a room change before anyone raises their voice. You can feel it in the way somebody stands too close, in the way their eyes go cold, in the little pause before a conversation becomes something else. Amara felt it then. Mercer took a half step closer. "Do you live around here?" he asked. "Yes." "Where?" Amara tilted her head. "Why do you need my address?" "Because I asked for it." "That is not a reason." His mouth tightened. "Ma'am, I am trying to figure out what you are doing here." Amara looked down the street, then back at him. I bought a cinnamon roll." "Cute, thank you." It was actually pretty good. For just a second, the corner of his mouth twitched, but it was not a smile. It was the look of a man who did not like being made to feel foolish, especially by a woman he had already decided was beneath him. Mercer looked her over again, slow enough to make the meaning clear. "This is a quiet neighborhood," he said. "People around here do not appreciate loitering." Amara folded the bakery bag carefully once, then twice. "I have been sitting here for 10 minutes. 10 minutes too long. And what exactly am I doing that is illegal?" That question landed wrong. Mercer had probably expected fear, maybe apologies, maybe a quick explanation and a quick exit. But Amara did not move. She did not get loud. She did not beg him to leave her alone. She just sat there looking at him with that calm, steady expression that people sometimes mistake for disrespect when they are used to everyone else shrinking around them. "You want to make this difficult?" Mercer asked. "No," Amara said. "I want you to tell me what law I broke." A woman named Mrs. Dorsey was inside the bakery, watching through the front window. She had owned the place for 28 years, and had seen enough trouble in her lifetime to know when it was headed straight toward her door. She stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Officer Mercer," she called. "Careful but firm. She is fine. She bought something from me." Mercer turned his head sharply. "Go back inside, Ms. Dorsey." The older woman froze. She knew that tone. Everybody in Bellwood knew that tone. Amara looked toward her and gave her a small nod, like she was trying to say, "It is okay. Do not get pulled into this." But it was not okay. That was the whole problem. Mercer leaned closer, his voice lower now. "You think because you can talk smooth, you get to sit wherever you want?" Amara looked him right in the eye. "I think I get to sit on a public sidewalk because I am an American citizen." His hand moved to the radio clipped near his shoulder. "I have had complaints about suspicious activity in this area. From who? That is none of your business." "Then I suppose neither is my life story." He laughed once, short and humorless. "You know what your problem is." Amara exhaled slowly. "I have a feeling you are about to tell me. You people always think the rules do not apply to you." There it was, not loud enough for a report, not clean enough for a quote, just ugly enough to say exactly what he meant. Amara felt something old rise up in her chest, something she had learned to carry without letting it control her. She remembered being 16 and followed around a department store by a security guard while her white classmates wandered freely. She remembered walking into banks with business plans and being mistaken for the assistant. She remembered the first time a man told her she was too ambitious, when what he really meant was that she was too black, too female, too unwilling to be grateful for a seat at somebody else's table. But Amara had learned a long time ago that anger could be expensive. One wrong word, one raised voice, one step too fast, and people like Mercer would use it as proof of every lie they wanted to believe about you. So she stood up slowly, keeping both hands where he could see them. "Officer," she said, "I am asking you one last time. Am I free to go?" Mercer looked pleased. He thought he had won. He thought she was finally backing down. "Not until I see some identification." Amara reached into her jacket pocket carefully and pulled out her wallet. "I am going to get my ID now. Do it slowly." "I was planning to." She handed him her driver's license. He looked at it, then looked at her, then looked down again. His face changed, but not in the way you might expect. It was not recognition. Not yet. It was irritation. The name meant nothing to him. Amara Bennett. A name he had probably heard on the news or seen on a building somewhere, but he was not the kind of man who paid much attention to the people behind the names, unless they were standing in front of him wearing a suit and shaking hands with the mayor. He handed the card back. "You from the east side?" he asked. Amara did not answer. "I asked you a question. You have my license." "Yeah, and I am asking where you live." "You can read." That was when he grabbed her arm. It happened fast enough that Mrs. Dorsey gasped. 1 second Amara was standing there with her wallet in her hand. The next Mercer had his fingers wrapped around her wrist, hard, like he was trying to remind her who had the authority here. "Do not get smart with me," he snapped. Amara pulled her arm back, not violently, just enough to get free. "Do not touch me." That was all it took. Mercer shoved her against the brick wall beside the bakery window. The paper bag fell to the sidewalk. The cinnamon roll out, icing streaking across the pavement, a stupid little detail that would stay with Amara later because sometimes your mind holds on to the strangest thing when the world turns dangerous. "Officer Mercer," Mrs. Dorsey shouted. "What are you doing?" "Stay back," he barked. She resisted. Amara stared at him, breathing hard now, not because she was afraid of him exactly, but because she knew what came next when a man like this decided he needed to protect his pride. "I did not resist," she said. "You grabbed me." "Turn around." "For what?" "Turn around now. Tell me what I am being detained for." He stepped even closer, close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. "For making me ask twice." And right there, on the sidewalk outside a bakery, Officer Cole Mercer showed exactly what kind of man he was. Not a man enforcing a law. not a man protecting a neighborhood. Just a man with a badge, a bad temper, and the terrifying belief that nobody would ever make him answer for either one. Amara looked past his shoulder and saw a young man standing near the bus stop across the street. He had a navy work shirt on, sleeves rolled up, backpack hanging from one shoulder. She had seen him earlier inside the bakery, waiting for a coffee, probably on his way home from work. He was holding his phone now, not up high, not making a show of it, but pointed in their direction. Mercer noticed him too. "You recording this?" he shouted. The young man did not move. "I am recording a public interaction," he said. Mercer started toward him, but Amara spoke before he could take another step. "Leave him alone." Mercer turned back to her slowly. "You do not tell me what to do." "No," Amara said, her voice quieter now, steadier than before. "But one day someone will." The young man at the bus stop was named Eli Navarro. He was 26, worked maintenance at the county hospital, and had spent most of his life avoiding trouble because he had seen what trouble could do to people who did not have money, connections, or a lawyer on speed dial. His older brother had been arrested at 19 for a broken taillight, and the story had gotten uglier from there. So Eli knew fear. He knew what it felt like to watch something wrong happen and calculate the cost of speaking up. But he also knew that if he put his phone away now, he would think about it for the rest of his life. Mercer radioed for backup. 2 minutes later, maybe 3, another cruiser pulled up with its lights flashing, red and blue spilling across the bakery windows. The second officer barely looked at Amara before taking Mercer's version as fact. "What have we got?" he asked. "Disorderly conduct," Mercer said. "Refusal to comply." Amara almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. A grown woman sitting outside a bakery had somehow become a public threat because she had asked a police officer to explain himself. "I want a lawyer," she said. Mercer looked at her like she had just confirmed everything he believed. "You will get your chance to make calls downtown." Eli stepped forward from across the street. "That is not what happened," he said. The second officer looked at him. "Sir, stay back." "He pushed her," Eli said. "She did not do anything." Mercer pointed at him. "Get his name too." Eli's face went pale, but he did not lower his phone. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment she saw the exact thing Mercer could not see. Courage, not the loud movie version with speeches and background music. The real kind. The kind that shakes in your hands while you do it. "Ali," Amara said softly, reading his name from the badge clipped to his work shirt. "Keep recording." Mercer heard that. His jaw clenched. "Put your hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked around Amara's wrists. Cold metal, too tight, unnecessary. Mrs. Dorsey began crying quietly in the bakery doorway. A few more people had gathered across the street, drawn by the flashing lights, but nobody came close. Nobody wanted to become the next problem. As Mercer walked Amara toward the cruiser, he leaned down near her ear and said, "This is what happens when people forget their place." Amara stopped walking. The second officer tugged at her arm, but she did not move for 1 second. Just long enough to turn her head and look Mercer dead in the eye. "No," she said. "This is what happens when men like you think they get to decide where everyone else belongs." Then she got into the back of the cruiser, and as the door slammed shut, Eli's phone kept recording. What Mercer did not know was that Amara Bennett was not alone. Not really. Not anymore. By the time that cruiser reached the Bellwood Police Department, a video had already been sent to 3 people. 1 local reporter, 1 civil rights attorney, and 1 man who had spent nearly a decade trying to warn the city that Officer Cole Mercer was dangerous. And before the sun went down, the entire town was going to learn that the woman in handcuffs was not the person who should have been afraid. The ride to the station took less than 8 minutes, but for Amara, it felt like one of those strange stretches of time where every second gets louder than the last. The cruiser smelled like old coffee, plastic, and whatever cheap cleaning spray they used to cover up the smell of fear that had probably soaked into those back seats over the years. Her hands were still cuffed behind her, her wrists aching every time the car turned, and through the dark glass she watched Bellwood slide past in pieces. The library she loved, the bus stop where Eli had stood with his phone, the little hardware store where her mother used to buy loose screws because they could not afford a whole box. It was her city. She had invested in it, hired people from it, paid for parks, scholarships, storefront repairs, after-school programs, all the things that politicians like to stand beside when cameras were around. But sitting in the back of that cruiser, none of that mattered. Not her company, not her money, not the headlines, not the awards hanging in the lobby of her office. In that moment, she was just a black woman in handcuffs, being driven downtown by a man who had decided she needed to be taught a lesson. Officer Mercer kept his eyes on the road. He did not say much at first, and somehow that was worse. The silence had weight to it. It sat between them like he wanted her to fill it with panic, apologies, tears, anything that would let him feel like he had won. Finally, when the cruiser stopped at a red light near the old courthouse, he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You should have just walked away," he said. Amara looked at his reflection. "You should have let me sit outside a bakery." He gave a little laugh. "You people always make everything bigger than it has to be." Amara leaned back against the hard seat. "No, officer. People like you make things bigger because you cannot stand being questioned." Mercer looked at her again, just for a second, and there was something in his face now that had not been there before. Not confidence, not exactly anger either. It was the first flicker of uncertainty. He had checked her license in the car before they left. He had typed her name into the system. Somewhere between Linden Street and downtown, the screen had probably lit up with information he did not expect. Amara Bennett, founder and CEO, major donor, city redevelopment board member. The name was starting to settle in his head now, and it was making him nervous. But nervous men with power do not always back down. Sometimes they get meaner. The cruiser rolled into the rear lot of the Bellwood Police Department, a squat brown brick building with narrow windows and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everybody look tired, guilty, or both. Mercer opened the back door and pulled Amara out by the elbow. Not hard enough to leave a bruise right away, not soft enough to pretend it was respectful. Just enough to remind her that he still could. "Watch your step," he said. Amara looked down at the cracked pavement. "I have been doing that my whole life." Inside, the booking area was busy in that dull, noisy way police stations always seem to be. Phones ringing, printers whining, officers talking too loudly about lunch while somebody cried behind a half-closed door down the hall. The young desk clerk looked up as Mercer brought Amara in, then looked down at the paperwork in his hand. He froze. It was subtle, but Amara saw it. His eyes moved from the name on the form to her face and then back again. "Is there a problem?" Mercer asked him. "No, sir." "Then process her." The young man nodded quickly, but his hands were shaking just a little as he typed. Amara watched him carefully. He was maybe 22, maybe younger, with the same look Eli had worn at the bus stop. The look of someone who knew something was wrong, but had not yet learned what it cost to say so out loud. Mercer stood behind her while the clerk asked for basic information. Name, address, date of birth, emergency contact. When he asked about legal representation, Amara answered without hesitation. "Maeve Grant, tell her I have been detained and I need her here now." The clerk looked confused. "The attorney Maeve Grant?" Mercer turned sharply. "Just make the call." That was when Amara knew Mercer understood exactly who she was. The name Maeve Grant was not famous in the way movie lawyers were famous, but in Bellwood, she was close enough. She had spent 25 years taking cases nobody else wanted. Wrongful arrests, housing discrimination, wage theft, police misconduct, the ugly little corners of public life that most people only noticed when they got trapped inside them. She had won cases against the city before. She had embarrassed county officials, broken up sweetheart contracts, forced school boards to release records they had hoped nobody would ever see. And more than once, she had gone after cops. Mercer had probably heard her name at roll call. He had probably heard the warnings. Do not talk to Grant without a union rep. Do not leave things in writing. Do not assume she is bluffing. Amara sat in a holding room for nearly 40 minutes. The cuffs were removed, but the room was still locked, still cold, still designed to remind people they were not in control. There was a metal table bolted to the floor, 2 plastic chairs, and a camera in the corner with a tiny red light that blinked like an eye that never got tired. She sat there with her hands folded in front of her and looked at the stain on the wall where somebody had tried and failed to scrub away an old coffee spill. It was funny what your mind noticed when you were trying not to think about the bigger thing. The bakery bag, the cinnamon roll on the pavement, Mrs. Dorsey crying, Eli's hand shaking around his phone. Her mother used to tell her that dignity was not something other people could give you, and it was not something they could take either. Not really. But sitting in that room, Amara understood something her mother had not said. They could try to make you feel small. They could make you carry the weight of their ugliness until it felt like it belonged to you. And if you were not careful, you could spend your whole life proving your humanity to people who never intended to recognize it. The door opened. Mercer walked in alone. He did not sit down at first. He stood across from her, arms folded, wearing that same tight little smile. "Your lawyer is on the way," he said. "Good. You know, this could all be over if you just admitted you were being disruptive." Amara looked at him. "You mean admitted I embarrassed you?" His smile disappeared. "You have no idea what you were talking about." "Actually, I do. I think you saw a woman sitting where you did not think she belonged, and you expected her to apologize for existing. Then you found out her name, and now you are trying to figure out how to make this your version of the story." Mercer walked around the table slowly. "You think money makes you untouchable?" "No," Amara said. "I think your badge made you think you were." He put both hands flat on the table and leaned toward her. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see somebody who comes into this town, buys up whole blocks, tears down places people grew up around, and then gives a speech about community like you did everybody a favor." That surprised her. Not because it was completely untrue that Bellwood had changed. It had. The city had changed in ways that made some people hopeful and others angry, and Amara had been in the middle of it. Her company had renovated abandoned buildings, brought in businesses, built affordable housing, but every project came with criticism. Some people thought she was saving the town. Some thought she was helping turn it into a place they could no longer afford. Amara had heard both sides, and unlike Mercer, she did not pretend one side did not exist. "You think this is about development?" she asked. "I think you people come in, smile for the cameras, and act like you own the place." Amara let out a breath. "I was born here. Maybe you were. But you do not live like the rest of us anymore." There it was again. Not just race, not just power, resentment. The kind that had been sitting inside him for years, looking for a face to attach itself to. Mercer had grown up in Bellwood too, in a house not far from the old rail yard. The son of a cop who used to tell him the city was falling apart because nobody respected authority anymore. His father had worked the same streets, worn the same uniform, and taught him that fear was the quickest way to earn obedience. Cole Mercer had spent his whole career watching the city change around him. Factories close, new businesses open, neighborhoods get painted and repaved, people with money moving in, while families he knew struggled to stay. Instead of asking why the system kept failing people, he had found an easier answer. Blame whoever was standing in front of you. Blame the young, blame the poor, blame the outsiders. Blame the black woman who had the nerve to become successful and still walk the same streets he believed belonged to men like him. "You do not know anything about me," Amara said quietly. Mercer straightened up. "I know enough." "No, you know what you wanted to know before you ever spoke to me." The door opened again before he could answer. A woman in a charcoal gray suit walked in carrying a leather folder under one arm and a paper cup of coffee in the other. Maeve Grant was in her early 50s. Silver streaks in her dark hair, sharp eyes, no wasted movement. She looked like somebody who had spent her whole life walking into rooms where men expected to intimidate her, and had learned how to make them regret trying. She took one look at Amara, one look at Mercer, and said, "Well, this is already smelling like a lawsuit." Mercer stepped back. "Counselor." Maeve ignored him at first. She set the coffee down in front of Amara, crouched beside her chair, and spoke softly. "Are you hurt?" Amara flexed her wrist. "Sore. Nothing broken." Maeve looked at the red marks left by the handcuffs and then at the faint bruise beginning near Amara's upper arm. Her face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. "Did he touch you before he placed you under arrest?" Amara nodded. "He grabbed me, then shoved me into a wall." Maeve stood up slowly and turned to Mercer. "You should call your union representative." Mercer crossed his arms. "She was disorderly." "Of course she was," Maeve said. "Women have a terrible habit of becoming disorderly when they ask why an armed stranger is harassing them." Mercer looked like he wanted to say something, but he had just enough sense not to. Maeve sat across from Amara and opened her folder. "Talk to me from the beginning. Every word you remember, every movement, every witness, every camera, every officer who arrived after him." Amara began at the bakery, the quiet afternoon. The first question. The way Mercer looked at her clothes. The comment about people like you. The grab. The shove. The handcuffs. She told it all without rushing, and Maeve wrote everything down in tight, neat handwriting. Every so often she stopped her. "What hand did he use? Did anyone hear that line? Was his body camera on? Did you ask if you were free to leave?" By the time Amara finished, the room felt different. It was no longer a holding room. It was the first page of a case. Maeve closed her folder. "You are going home," she said. "The charge is flimsy and they know it. But going home is not the same thing as this being over." Amara looked at her. "I do not want this buried." Maeve nodded once. "Then it will not be buried. I do not want a private apology. I do not want them to suspend him for a week and send him back out there. Then we do not ask for one." Amara looked through the narrow window in the door. "How bad is it?" Maeve pulled out her phone. "Your witness uploaded the video." Amara blinked. Illy Navarro. Smart kid. He sent it to a local reporter before he sent it to us. The clip is already moving around online. She turned the phone so Amara could see. The video was shaky, filmed from across Linden Street, but clear enough. Mercer standing over her, his hand gripping her arm, his body blocking part of the view, his voice loud enough to catch the words. "You people always think the rules do not apply to you." The video ended just before the handcuffs clicked, but by then it had already done what it needed to do. It showed the tone. It showed the imbalance. It showed that Amara had not been the aggressor. "How many people have seen it?" Amara asked. Maeve glanced at the screen. "A lot more than Mercer would like." The next few hours moved fast. The charge against Amara was reduced from disorderly conduct to a summons for alleged failure to comply, a vague little accusation designed to leave a stain without requiring much proof. Maeve got a release just after sunset, and when they walked out the front entrance of the police station, the scene outside looked nothing like the one Amara had entered. Reporters were waiting behind temporary barriers. Cameras were pointed toward the steps. A small crowd had formed across the street, some holding phones, some holding handmade signs, some just standing there with the stunned expressions people wear when something they have quietly feared is suddenly happening in public. Eli was there too. He stood near a lamppost with his backpack still over one shoulder, like he had never made it home from work. When he saw Amara, he looked relieved and terrified at the same time. She walked over to him before anyone could stop her. "You okay?" she asked. Eli nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I think so." "You did the right thing." He looked toward the station. "I do not know if that is going to feel right tomorrow." Amara understood exactly what he meant. Courage had a price, and people who praised it from far away rarely had to pay it. "Did anyone threaten you?" she asked. "Not directly." "That means they are thinking about it." Maeve stepped closer. "Mr. Navarro, I would like you to have my number. If anyone from the department contacts you, if anyone follows you, if anyone makes you feel unsafe, you call me before you say a word to them." Eli took the card. "I just did not want them to say she was lying." The words hung there for a moment. Amara looked at him, and something inside her softened. He was young, tired, scared, and still he had chosen not to look away. "They cannot say it now," she told him. "Not without saying you were lying too." The press started shouting questions. "Ms. Bennett, were you targeted because of your race? Will you file charges? Officer Mercer says you refused lawful commands. How do you respond?" Amara stopped on the top step. Maeve looked at her, ready to guide her away. But Amara shook her head. She was exhausted, her wrists hurt, her jacket still had a smudge of dirt from the brick wall, and every instinct in her wanted to go home, lock the door, and disappear for a day. But then she looked at the people on the sidewalk. Mrs. Dorsey had come too, still wearing her apron. A delivery driver stood beside her. Two teenagers held a sign made from the back of a pizza box that read, "We saw what he did." Bellwood had spent years whispering about Officer Mercer. Maybe it was time somebody said his name out loud. "I was sitting outside a bakery," Amara said into the lights. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I had done nothing wrong. I asked for an explanation and I was treated like a threat. This is not about me being important. It is about the fact that nobody should need to be important to be treated with basic dignity." The crowd went silent. Even the reporter stopped yelling for a moment. "I have resources," Amara continued. "I have a lawyer. I have people who know my name." Most people, Officer Mercer has stopped, did not have those things. So no, I am not going to let this become a small story, because I was lucky enough to survive it with witnesses. I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to keep asking them until somebody answers. The next morning, Bellwood woke up divided. Some people saw Amara as brave. Others saw her as another wealthy person using a bad moment to make herself look noble. There were talk radio hosts calling it an overreaction, commenters saying Mercer was just doing his job, strangers online posting things like, if she had simply cooperated, none of this would have happened. That one was always popular. It had a nice clean sound to it, like the whole world could be fixed if people just obeyed the right person fast enough. But there were other voices too. People started sharing their own stories. A college student named Jamal wrote about Mercer stopping him outside a convenience store and making him sit on the curb for 20 minutes because he matched a vague description. A nurse named Linda Price said Mercer had searched her car during a traffic stop after accusing her teenage son of hiding drugs. A man named Robert Haynes, 61 years old and white, wrote that Mercer had shoved his disabled nephew against a squad car 3 years earlier and then threatened to charge him if the family complained. The stories came in slowly at first, then all at once. By noon, Maeve's office had received 14 calls. By the end of the day, it was more than 30. Some were detailed. Some were shaky and incomplete. Some people hung up before leaving a name, but the pattern was there. Mercer had not made one bad decision outside a bakery. He had been making the same decision for years, over and over, choosing people he thought no one would defend. On the third day, Maeve brought Amara to her office, a narrow old building above a florist shop downtown. The waiting room was full. A young mother sat holding a folder of old court papers. An older man stared at the floor with his hat in both hands. A teenage girl whispered to her aunt near the window. Amara had expected anger. What she had not expected was how much exhaustion there was in the room. These people were not looking for revenge. They were tired of carrying stories nobody wanted to hear. Maeve led Amara into the conference room where Eli was already waiting, along with a woman in a navy coat named Deputy Chief Teresa Voss. Voss was not there officially, at least not according to the city. She had asked for a private meeting. She was in her late 50s, respected by most officers, feared by the ones who liked cutting corners, and she had spent years trying to move up without becoming the kind of leader who forgot why she joined in the first place. She looked at Amara with a heavy expression. "I should have spoken up sooner," Voss said. Amara did not answer right away. "About what?" Voss placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Internal complaints. There were more than I was told. Some were closed without investigation. Some disappeared from the system entirely." Maeve opened the envelope and started reading. Her expression changed with every page. "These are against Mercer?" Voss nodded. "Most of them. A few involve other officers, but Mercer is the common thread." Eli looked from one woman to the other. "Can they do that? Just make complaints disappear?" Voss gave a bitter little smile. "They are not supposed to. That does not mean they cannot." Amara looked at the stack of papers. Names, dates, allegations, all the proof of years of silence sitting in one thick envelope. "Why bring this to us now?" she asked. Voss looked tired. "Not guilty exactly, but close enough that the difference did not matter much. Because when your video came out, I knew the department would try to contain it. They would call it an isolated incident. They would say Mercer acted alone. They would wait for the public to get distracted. And I realized I was about to help them do it again." Maeve sat back in her chair. "If these records are real, this is bigger than a wrongful arrest." "It is bigger," Voss said. "And it is uglier." Amara stared at the envelope for a long moment. She had wanted accountability. She had wanted Mercer to face consequences. But now she could see the shape of something much larger. Something that had been sitting under the surface of Bellwood for years. This was not one man with a bad temper. This was a system that had seen the damage and decided it was easier to look away. Maeve closed the file. "We file tomorrow," she said. "Civil rights violations, unlawful detention, assault, retaliation, failure to supervise, record suppression. We name Mercer. We name the department. We name whoever signed off on burying these complaints." Eli shifted in his chair. "And then what?" Maeve looked at him. "Then they fight. Hard." Amara knew that was true. She knew they would try to dig into her business, her past, her family. They would say she was using money to bully a public servant. They would say the witnesses had been influenced. They would call the video incomplete, the complaints unreliable, the entire case political. They would bring up every difficult decision she had ever made as a developer, every building her company renovated, every resident who felt left behind by progress, and some of it would hurt because some of it would be complicated. Life was rarely as clean as the stories people told about it afterward. But Mercer had made one mistake he could not take back. He had put his hands on her in public. He had spoken his contempt where a camera could hear it. And he had done it to a woman who finally had enough reach to pull every hidden story into the light. That evening, Amara went home to the old house she had bought for her mother years ago. Though her mother had passed away before she could enjoy the renovated kitchen Amara had been so proud of, the house was quiet, too quiet. She stood in the living room looking at a framed photograph on the mantel, her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a tired smile and a coffee mug in both hands. Amara had always thought strength meant never letting anybody see you bend. But that night she sat on the floor with her back against the couch and cried. Not because Mercer had broken her. He had not. Not because she doubted herself. She did not. She cried because she knew what was coming, and because she knew she could not turn away now. Somewhere across town, Officer Cole Mercer was sitting in his kitchen, staring at the television, while every local station played the same clip from Linden Street. His wife Dana stood near the sink with her arms crossed. "Cole," she said quietly, "what did you do?" Mercer did not answer. On the screen, Amara's voice played again. Nobody should need to be important to be treated with basic dignity. Mercer reached for the remote and turned the volume down. Then he looked at the dark reflection of himself in the television screen. For the first time in a long time, he did not look like a man in control. He looked like a man who had finally run out of places to hide. And by the end of that week, the city announced that Officer Cole Mercer had been placed on administrative leave, not because they had suddenly discovered a conscience, but because the truth was getting too loud to ignore. By the end of that week, the city announced that Officer Cole Mercer had been placed on administrative leave, not because they had suddenly discovered a conscience, but because the truth was getting too loud to ignore. Bellwood had become the kind of town where people checked their phones before breakfast to see what new piece of the story had surfaced overnight. There were clips from the bakery, interviews with old residents, screenshots of complaint numbers, blurry pictures of Mercer walking into the station with his head down and his jaw clenched. Every day seemed to bring another name, another story, another person saying, "Yeah, that happened to me too." And the strange thing was, once people finally started talking, they did not sound angry at first. They sounded relieved. Relieved that somebody else had seen it. Relieved that they had not imagined it. Relieved that maybe the thing they had carried around for years, that feeling of being powerless and embarrassed and somehow blamed for what happened to them, was not going to stay buried anymore. Amara saw those stories every day. She read them in the early morning at her kitchen table, coffee going cold beside her while the sun came up through the window. She read about teenagers pulled over for walking home after dark, mothers threatened with arrest for asking why their sons were being searched, elderly men told to sit on curbs in the rain while Mercer searched cars without warrants. One woman wrote that Mercer had stopped her husband outside a gas station 12 years earlier, pushed him against a patrol car, and told him, "Nobody is going to believe you over me." Her husband had never filed a complaint. He had been on probation at the time for a minor offense, and he was terrified that saying anything would send him back to jail. The wife ended her message with one sentence that stayed with Amara for days. She wrote, "He came home that night looking like somebody had taken something from him, but he never told me what it was." Amara understood that sentence better than she wanted to. There were injuries people could see, bruises, cuts, hospital bills, broken windows, torn clothes. Then there were injuries that did not leave marks. The kind that made people avoid certain streets, avoid eye contact with police officers, avoid speaking too loudly in public because part of them had learned that any small thing could be turned against them. That was what Mercer had been doing all those years. He had not just been making arrests, he had been teaching people to stay quiet. Maeve Grant's office turned into something between the legal clinic and a war room. Folding chairs filled the hallway. Volunteers brought sandwiches, coffee, bottled water, stacks of blank forms. Law students from the university came in after class to help organize complaint files. A retired court clerk named Howard Bell offered to sort public records because, as he put it, "I have spent 30 years watching paperwork disappear in this town, and I am old enough now to be annoying about it." Amara liked Howard immediately. He wore suspenders, carried peppermints in his shirt pocket, and had the calm confidence of a man who had stopped caring whether powerful people liked him. He also had a memory like a filing cabinet. Within 3 days, he found something nobody had expected. There had been an internal review of Mercer 4 years earlier after a 16-year-old boy named Terrence Hale was hospitalized during an arrest. The report had been marked incomplete, then quietly closed after the department said there was insufficient evidence. But Howard found a reference to a second document, one that had never been attached to the final file. It was a written statement from another officer who had been at the scene. The officer claimed Mercer had used force after Terrence was already on the ground. The statement had disappeared from the official record, Maeve read it twice, then looked up at Amara with the kind of expression lawyers get when they find something that changes the whole shape of a case. "This is not sloppiness," Maeve said. "This is concealment." Amara sat at the conference table staring at the printed pages. "Can we prove who removed it?" Maeve tapped the corner of the report. "Not yet. But someone signed off on closing this investigation, and somebody had access to that statement after it was submitted." Deputy Chief Teresa Voss had not been back to the office since the day she brought the sealed envelope, but she had been in contact with Maeve through a private number. She was still technically inside the department, still walking the same halls as people who had spent years protecting Mercer, and every message she sent came with a warning. "Do not use my name yet. Do not trust department emails. Do not assume the record server is secure." It was not the kind of thing anyone wanted to hear, but it confirmed what Amara had already begun to understand. Mercer had been dangerous because of who he was, but he had lasted this long because other people found it easier to manage the danger than confront it. 2 weeks after the arrest, Maeve filed the civil lawsuit. It named Officer Cole Mercer, the Bellwood Police Department, the city, and several supervisors connected to the dismissed complaints. The suit alleged unlawful detention, excessive force, racial discrimination, retaliation, failure to supervise, and deliberate suppression of misconduct reports. The city tried to sound calm in its public statement. They said they took all allegations seriously. They said an independent review was underway. They said they believed in transparency. Bellwood residents had heard those words before, and nobody was impressed. The city council meeting that Monday night was standing room only. People filled the chamber, spilled out into the hallway, watched from a screen in the lobby. Some came because they supported Amara. Some came because they supported the police. Some came because they had never cared much about city politics before, but suddenly realized city politics had been making decisions about their lives without them. Amara sat in the front row beside Maeve and Eli. Eli had changed in the past 2 weeks. He still looked nervous when cameras turned toward him. Still rubbed the edge of his phone case with his thumb when he was anxious, but there was something steadier in him now. He had given his statement. He had turned over the original video file. He had told the truth even after anonymous messages started showing up in his inbox, warning him that he did not know what he was getting himself into. The police union had released a statement calling the lawsuit opportunistic. A local radio host had spent an entire morning talking about how Mercer was being tried by social media. One caller said Amara had no business speaking for the community because she was rich. Another said the city was sacrificing a good cop to make politicians look better. The comments had gotten ugly enough that Maeve made Amara stop reading them. "You cannot argue with everybody who wants to misunderstand you," she told her. "You would never sleep again." But that night at the council meeting, Amara did not have the option of staying quiet. The mayor called her name as she walked to the microphone while the room watched. For a few seconds, she did not speak. She looked around at the people sitting behind her. Mrs. Dorsey from the bakery, Terrence Hale and his mother, Jamal, the college student, Linda Price, the nurse, Robert Haynes and his nephew. People who had been scared, embarrassed, dismissed, ignored. Then she looked at the council members sitting in their polished chairs behind the long wooden desk. "I know there are people in this room who think this is about one officer," Amara began. Her voice was calm, but the room was so quiet that even a whisper would have carried. "It is not. One officer can make a terrible decision. One officer can lose control. One officer can hurt someone. But when complaint after complaint disappears, when victims are told not to make trouble, when supervisors know what is happening and do nothing, that is not one officer. That is a culture." A few people clapped. Others shifted in their seats. A man near the back muttered something about anti-police rhetoric, but Amara kept going. "I am not here because I hate police officers. I am here because people deserve police officers. They do not have to fear. I am here because the badge should mean safety, not silence. And I am here because I had a lawyer and a witness and a name people recognized. The question is, what happens to the people who do not have any of those things?" The mayor tried to respond with a prepared statement, but the crowd would not let him hide behind it. One person stood up, then another, then another. For nearly 4 hours, Bellwood residents told stories. Some cried, some shook with anger, some could barely get the words out. A retired teacher spoke about a former student who had stopped coming to school after being arrested by Mercer and called a liar. A woman in a blue sweater described watching Mercer search her son's backpack while he stood in the snow. An older black man named Samuel Price said he had been stopped by Mercer 3 times in 5 years, and every time he had been told the same thing. You fit a description. Samuel paused at the microphone and said, "After a while, I started wondering what description he meant. Then I realized he meant me." That line stayed in the room like smoke. Even people who had come to defend Mercer looked uncomfortable after that. It was one thing to argue about policies from a distance. It was another thing to sit 10 feet away from a man in his 70s and watch him explain how he had spent years avoiding the grocery store after dark because he was afraid of being stopped again. 3 days later, Officer Mercer gave his first public statement. It happened outside the police union building, with his lawyer standing beside him and a row of officers behind him. He wore a dark suit, not his uniform, and he looked thinner than he had in the video from Linden Street. But there was still something hard in his face, something stubborn. He said he regretted that the situation had escalated. He said he had acted in good faith based on suspicious behavior. He said the video did not show the full context. Then a reporter asked him what suspicious behavior Amar Bennett had displayed. Mercer stood there for a moment, caught between answers. His lawyer stepped in and said they would not comment on pending litigation, but the damage was done. People had been waiting for a reason. A bag of pastries on a sidewalk was not enough. Sitting quietly outside a bakery was not enough. Asking an officer to explain the law was not enough. The whole city could see it now, even the people who did not want to. Mercer had no story that made sense unless you already believed Amar deserved to be treated as a threat. That same afternoon, Deputy Chief Voss finally agreed to meet Amara in person. They met at a quiet diner outside town. The kind of place with red vinyl booths and a pie case near the register. Voss arrived without her uniform, wearing jeans, a plain jacket, and an expression that made her look older than she was. She sat across from Amara and did not touch the coffee in front of her. "There's something else," she said. Maeve was there too, along with Eli, who had insisted on coming because he did not want to be left out of whatever was happening next. Voss pulled a small flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the table. This contains body camera footage from incidents that were marked as corrupted or unavailable. Maeve looked at the drive. "How did you get this?" Voss looked down. "I kept copies." Amara studied her face. "For how long?" "Years." "Why?" Voss took a breath. "Because I knew eventually someone would need them." Amara leaned back slowly. "And why did you not do something sooner?" Voss did not get defensive. Maybe she knew she did not have the right. "Because I was afraid. Because I thought I could change things from inside. Because every time I tried to raise concerns, I was told I was being disloyal. Because I watched people who spoke up get transferred, pushed out, passed over. And because I told myself I was protecting my career so I could help more people later." She looked directly at Amara then. "That was the lie I kept telling myself. Later became years. Years became a career, and people got hurt while I waited for the right moment." Nobody spoke for a while. The waitress came by and asked if anyone wanted pie. Nobody did. Finally, Amara said, "You cannot undo what happened." Voss nodded. "I know, but you can stop helping it happen." Voss's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "That is why I am here." The footage on the flash drive was worse than anyone expected. It showed Mercer stopping people for vague reasons, using a tone that changed the moment he dealt with someone who looked powerless. In one clip, he pulled over a young Latino man because he said the car was driving too slowly, then laughed when the driver asked why he was being searched. In another, he forced a black teenager to sit on a curb while he went through his backpack, then told him he should be grateful Mercer was having a good day. In another, Mercer shoved Terrence Hale against a patrol car after the boy had already put his hands up. The camera did not show everything, but it showed enough. It showed patterns. It showed choices. It showed a man who treated his authority like a personal weapon. The lawsuit moved faster after that. The city tried to negotiate a private settlement, offering Amara a large amount of money, a vague promise of reforms, and a statement that did not require anyone to admit wrongdoing. Maeve brought the offer to Amara late one night. They sat in the conference room, the city lights glowing through the windows, stacks of files covering every flat surface. "It is a lot of money," Maeve said. Amara gave a tired laugh. "Maeve, I know how much money I have." "I know. I am telling you because they think it will matter. What do they want in return?" Maeve looked at the papers. Confidentiality. No public release of the body camera footage. No admission of liability. Internal review. Not an outside investigation. Mercer resigns quietly. The city pays. The union says nothing. Everybody moves on. Amara looked out the window for a long time. And the people he hurt? They could file separate claims. Could, Amara repeated. Meaning they would each have to find lawyers, relive everything, fight the city one by one. Maeve nodded. Amara thought about Terrence's mother sitting in the council chamber with both hands wrapped around a tissue. She thought about Eli at the bus stop, shaking but still holding up his phone. She thought about Mrs. Dorsey crying in the bakery doorway. She thought about every person who had been told that nobody would believe them. No, Amara said, we do not settle quietly. Maeve looked at her for a moment, then smiled a little. Good, because I already told them no. The case went to trial 6 months later. By then, Bellwood had changed. Not completely. Cities do not change completely in 6 months. People did not suddenly agree on everything. There were still signs in yards supporting Mercer. There were still radio callers saying he was being punished for doing his job. There were still officers who treated Foss like a traitor and Eli like a troublemaker. But there were also new signs in windows. Justice is not a favor. We believe the witnesses. Bellwood deserves better. The bakery where it all started had become a quiet kind of landmark. Mrs. Dorsey had framed a photo of Amara standing on the sidewalk before the arrest, taken from a security camera still. Not because Amara looked important in it, she did not. She looked ordinary. That was the point. On the first day of trial, the courthouse was packed. Reporters filled the press benches. Residents lined up outside before sunrise. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table beside Maeve, wearing a navy suit and a simple gold necklace that had belonged to her mother. Eli sat behind them along with Mrs. Balsine, Dorsey, Terrence Hale, Deputy Chief Foss, and people whose names had become part of a story none of them had asked to join. Across the room, Mercer sat beside his attorneys. He looked older now. His hair was thinner, his face more drawn. But every now and then, when he thought nobody was looking, Amara saw the same expression flash across his face, that small, hard smirk, like part of him still believed this would all go away if he waited long enough. The city attorney opened first. He talked about difficult work, split-second decisions, the stress officers faced, the importance of not judging actions with hindsight. Maeve listened without reacting. Then she stood up, walked to the center of the courtroom, and looked at the jury. This case is not about whether policing is difficult, she said. It is. This case is about what happens when difficult work becomes an excuse for cruelty. It is about what happens when a man is given power and decides that power means he no longer has to treat people like human beings. And it is about what happens when the people above him see the damage and decide it is easier to protect the institution than protect the public. The first witness was Mrs. Dorsey. She wore her best blue dress and clutched a handkerchief in both hands. Her voice trembled at first, but she got stronger as she spoke. She described Amara sitting quietly outside the bakery. She described Mercer walking over with no complaint, no emergency, no reason. She described the way he looked at Amara, not like someone concerned for public safety, but like someone irritated by her presence. He treated her like she was dirt on his shoe, Mrs. Dorsey said. Mercer's lawyer asked if she could really know what the officer was thinking. Mrs. Dorsey, lawyer. Dorsey looked at him over the top of her glasses. Son, I have been alive 74 years. I know what hate looks like when it is trying to wear a uniform. There was a ripple through the courtroom, the kind of ripple a judge usually stops with a warning. But even the judge took a second before saying, "Please keep your reactions to yourselves." Then Eli testified. He walked to the witness stand in a dark suit that looked slightly too big in the shoulders. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and sat down. Mercer stared at him the whole time. Eli noticed. Everybody noticed. But he kept his eyes on Maeve. She asked him why he started recording that day. Eli swallowed. Because I saw the officer grab her, and I knew what he was doing was wrong. Had you ever met Miss Bennett before? No. Did you know who she was? No. I thought she was just somebody sitting outside a bakery. Maeve let that sit for a moment. Then she asked, why did you not walk away? Eli looked toward the jury. Because my brother walked away once. He walked away from a situation where an officer was yelling at him and he got called uncooperative anyway. He spent a year dealing with charges that got dropped later, but the damage was already done. I guess I thought if I walked away that day, I would be helping it happen again. Mercer's attorney tried to suggest Eli had been influenced by Amara's fame, by social media, by activists. Ellie shook his head. I was influenced by what I saw. That is it. Then came the body camera footage. The courtroom lights dimmed, and one by one, the clips played across the large screen. There were no dramatic soundtracks, no speeches, just real voices, real fear, real moments of people asking why they were being stopped, and Mercer responding with sarcasm, threats, and contempt. The footage was hard to watch because it was so ordinary. That was what made it worse. It was not a movie villain doing something impossible. It was a man using his position in small ways, over and over, until the small things became a pattern too large to deny. When the video of Terrence Hale played, his mother covered her mouth and began to cry. Terrence sat beside her, 20 years old now, staring straight ahead. Mercer looked down at the table. For the first time, he did not look angry. He looked cornered. Deputy Chief Voss took the stand the next day. The courtroom knew who she was by then. Some saw her as a whistleblower. Others saw her as someone who had waited too long. Maeve did not try to make her look perfect. "Did you fail to act when you first saw concerns about Officer Mercer?" Maeve asked. Voss looked at the jury. "Yes. Did you allow your fear of retaliation to keep you silent?" "Yes." "Do you allow your fear of retaliation to keep you silent?" "Yes." "Do you regret that?" Voss's voice cracked slightly. Every day, the city attorney tried to paint her as bitter, someone who had been passed over for promotion and wanted revenge. Voss did not rise to it. "I was promoted," she said. "That is part of why I am ashamed. I stayed quiet, and the system rewarded me for it." There was nothing the attorney could do with that answer. It was too honest. On the fourth day, Amara finally took the stand. She had been preparing for it for months, but when she sat in the witness chair and looked across the room at Mercer, the memory came back with painful clarity. The warm sidewalk, the smell of cinnamon, the tightness in his hand around her wrist, the sound of the cruiser door closing. Maeve asked her what she had felt that day. Amara took a slow breath. "At first, I felt confused. Then I felt angry. Then I felt scared." "What were you afraid of?" "That he could do anything he wanted and make it sound legal afterward." The courtroom was silent. Maeve nodded. "Did you know Officer Mercer would recognize your name when he checked your license?" "No." "Did you tell him you were a business owner, a donor, a public figure, or someone with influence?" "No." "Why not?" Amara looked down at her hands for a moment. "Because I should not have needed to." She looked back up. "I was sitting outside a bakery. I should have been safe because I was a person, not because somebody might know my name." The city attorney came at her hard during cross-examination. He asked about her company. He asked about development projects. He asked whether she had benefited from media attention. He asked whether she had any financial motive to damage the department's reputation. Amara listened to every question, then answered without rushing. "My company has made difficult decisions," she said. "Some people have disagreed with them. That is fair, but nothing about my work gives an officer the right to put his hands on me without cause. Nothing about being successful makes discrimination acceptable. And nothing about being criticized means I deserve what happened." Then the attorney asked the question everyone knew was coming. "Ms. Bennett, is it possible Officer Mercer simply made a mistake?" Amara looked toward Mercer. He was watching her now, not smirking, not looking away, just watching. "A mistake happens once," she said. "A pattern happens because someone believes they will never be stopped." The jury deliberated for almost 9 hours. Those were the longest 9 hours Amara could remember. She sat in the courthouse hallway with Maeve, Eli, Mrs. Nye, Dorsey, Terrence, Voss, and dozens of people who had become connected by a story none of them could have predicted. Nobody talked much. Howard Bell passed around peppermints. Eli paced until Maeve threatened to tape his shoes to the floor. Mrs. Dorsey kept saying she should have brought more snacks, which made Amara laugh for the first time all day. It was a small laugh, but it helped. At nearly 7 o'clock that evening, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Everyone stood as the jury returned. Mercer walked in from the side entrance with his lawyers. His face had gone pale. The foreperson held a stack of papers in both hands. The judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." The room became so quiet that Amara could hear the air conditioner humming above them. The foreperson began reading. The jury found Officer Cole Mercer liable for unlawful detention, excessive force, racial discrimination, and retaliation. They found the Bellwood Police Department and the city liable for failure to supervise and deliberate indifference to a pattern of civil rights violations. The judge announced damages, but the number did not matter much to Amara. What mattered was the words, liable, responsible, pattern, deliberate indifference. For years, Mercer had counted on everyone being too afraid too poor, too tired, too isolated to fight him. But now, it was written into the record where nobody could pretend it had not happened. Mercer did not explode. He did not shout. He just sat there staring at the table like the world had finally stopped making room for him. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown so large that the police had blocked off part of the street. Reporters pushed forward as Amara came down the steps, but she did not rush past them. She stood beneath the courthouse columns with Maeve on one side and Eli on the other. Behind her, people held signs, photographs, folders full of old complaints, hands clasped together. A reporter asked, "Ms. Bennett, do you feel like justice was done today?" Amara looked out at the crowd. She thought about how easy it would be to say yes. People wanted clean endings. They wanted one bad officer punished, one good woman vindicated, one city transformed by a courtroom speech. But real life did not work that way. Today was accountability, she said. Justice is what happens next. The reporter leaned closer. What do you mean by that? Amara looked back at the courthouse doors. If Officer Mercer loses his job but the people who protected him keep their positions, that is not justice. If the city writes a check but does not change how complaints are handled, that is not justice. If people only believe victims when they are wealthy, famous, or caught on camera, that is not justice either. The crowd was completely still. Justice is not a moment, Amara continued. It is a habit. It is what a community chooses to do when nobody is watching. A few months later, Mercer was officially terminated from the department. The state opened a review of his certification. Several older cases connected to him were reopened. 2 supervisors resigned before they could be questioned under oath. The city agreed to create an independent civilian review board, release misconduct statistics every quarter, protect whistleblowers, and fund legal support for residents filing complaints. None of it fixed the past. Terrence could not get back the years he spent believing nobody would listen. Jamal could not erase the fear he felt every time he saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. Deputy Chief Voss could not take back her silence. Ellie could not undo the nights he lay awake wondering whether somebody would show up at his apartment because he had pressed record. But change rarely arrives with a clean slate. Sometimes it arrives with a file folder, a witness statement, a shaky video, and one person deciding they're done being quiet. Amara used part of the settlement to create the Linden Street Justice Fund, named after the block where everything began. The fund paid for legal consultations, emergency support, and community advocates for people dealing with wrongful stops, housing discrimination, and abuse of authority. She did not put her name on the building. Maeve teased her about it. You know, donors usually like their names in big gold letters. Amara smiled. The people who need help do not care what the building is called. 1 year after the arrest, Amara walked back to Mrs. Dorsey's bakery. It was another warm afternoon, almost exactly like the day Mercer first approached her. The same brick wall was outside. The same traffic moved down Linden Street. The same bus stop stood across from the bakery, though the city had added a small security camera nearby after the reforms. Mrs. Pease. Dorsey brought Amara a cinnamon roll without asking. On the house, she said. Amara laughed. I can afford a cinnamon roll, Ms. Dorsey. I know. That is why I am charging you double next time. Eli came in a few minutes later, wearing hospital scrubs and looking older somehow, more confident. He had started volunteering with the Justice Fund on weekends, helping people learn how to request public records and preserve videos safely. He sat beside Amara at the window table and looked out at the street. Do you ever wish you had just gone home that day? He asked. Amara thought about it. That was the honest question, not the easy one. Did she wish she had walked away before Mercer came over, before the handcuffs, before the cameras, before the months of hearings and threats and sleepless nights? Sometimes, she said, I wish none of it had happened. I wish you had never needed to record it. I wish all those people never had stories to tell. Eli nodded. But? Amara looked at the sidewalk outside. But I do not wish we stayed silent. Eli smiled a little. Yeah, me neither. They sat there for a while, just watching people pass by. A woman pushed a stroller. 2 teenagers argued over a phone. A delivery driver rushed across the street with a bag of food. Ordinary life, messy and loud and moving forward. And Amara thought about the thing Mercer had said to her that day, about forgetting her place. For years, people like him had used that phrase in different ways. Sometimes out loud, sometimes not. Know your place. Stay in your lane. Do not make trouble. Do not ask too many questions. But maybe that was the real lesson of Bellwood. Maybe a person's place was not where somebody powerful told them to stand. Maybe their place was wherever they decided they had the right to be, on a sidewalk, in a courtroom, at a microphone, in the truth. And maybe the hardest part was not standing up after someone tried to push you down. Maybe the hardest part was deciding that, when you finally got back up, you were going to reach for somebody else's hand too. So what do you think? Did Bellwood get justice? Or did the city only act because the wrong officer picked the wrong woman? Should Deputy Chief Voss be forgiven for coming forward late? Or should silence inside the system carry consequences too? And when an officer abuses power for years, is losing the badge enough? Or should every leader who helped protect him answer for it as well? Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like this do not change anything unless people are willing to talk about the hard parts. And if you believe courage can start with one person refusing to look away, subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the ordinary people who decide enough is enough.